Welcome, beautiful people of all ages, shapes, and colors, to another episode of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, where we encourage you to stick to the basics. I'm one of your co-hosts, TV, aka TV on basketball, alongside my co-host, Jay, aka Knockdown Jay. How's it going, my guy?
Chilling, bro. NBA regular season is almost over. That means we're getting into playoff shape, my boy. We always know when this time of the year comes around, that means the basketball is going to be high level, and it means that the coverage has to match. So we just going to be fully locked in coming into April, man. It feels good to be coming down home stretch.
100%. I'm super excited for this episode. We're when we come to the end of the season, it's about award season time as well. So today we're going to be covering all rookie teams, all defensive teams. We're going to have at the buzzer for you. It's going to be another great episode. We're excited for you guys to lock in, and we're going to be locked in for the end of the season with like all the award stuff that's going on, all NBA, the NBA awards we got to do at the end of the season. And of course, when it comes to the playoffs, that's when when the Hit Your Free Throws podcast is like shining at its best. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be a great couple of weeks, and we're going to be starting the award stuff today. So it's going to be a great episode. But before we get into this, we do have to plug our socials. Make sure you follow our individual socials at TV on Basketball, at the Knockdown J / the Routine Jumper. Those links can be found in the description down below. In terms of Hit Your Free Throws pod, remember to follow us on TikTok and Instagram for the best daily NBA content, where you have the picks, the clips, the news, all that good stuff can be found on TikTok and Instagram. On YouTube, remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you will not miss an episode. Again, we celebrated the 100th episode last week. We're in triple digits now. We're freaking like locked in, and we're going to keep bringing you some more stuff. So make sure you check out the YouTube for that. And of course, the podcast network, Spotify, and Apple. Remember to leave a review, subscribe, all that good stuff. We appreciate all of y'all's support. Jay, are you ready to get into this?
Yes, sir.
Like we said, this is NBA award season, and that the conversations around all defensive, all rookie teams is gonna start up now. Especially we're like 70 plus games into the season. We have we're in the very much the final stretch. So I think we have enough information to make these picks now, right, Jay? For sure.
Especially because of the ones that we're specifically touching on today. They're not ones that I feel like are super controversial at this moment. So I think this is a decent sample size to kind of jump off of. And then, of course, as the season really, really does wind down to that final 2 games or so, then that's when, the real all-NBA teams and stuff like that, we can lock into that part and actually doing like our NBA award sessions, the stuff that everybody's, always loves to kind of debate around when it comes to regular season awards. But this episode in particular feels like the list is pretty set in stone, bro. The question is just whether or not we agree or not, to be honest.
100%. I mean, there's a few guys that are, a bit caught. I mean, I feel like the first teams are going to be kind of, pretty bog standard from both of us. It's like when you get into the second teams and you're going to get a couple of subs here and there because there's some guys you can really make arguments for. That's when the discussion is going to happen. But I think we're gonna cover all of the best, again, rookies, all defensive guys. We're going to cover all here. Jay, we'll start with the rookies, all right? We'll start with the rookies teams. And the good thing about both of these teams too, Jay, both teams are positionless. So we don't have to worry about forwards, guards, all that. We're not trying to here making the best, the best 5-man lineup. We're here trying to give love to the best rookies and defensive players over here. And we're going to start with the all-rookie team. Jay, we don't even go by position. Give me your 5 players on your all-rookie first team.
So my all-rookie first team, it's kind of pretty straightforward. So my all-rookie first team for the 2024 class is Stephon Castle, Zachary Risache, Alex Sarr, Khalil Ware has picked up significantly for me, and I'm keeping Jalen Wells in here as well.
Interesting. We are 4 for 5 the same.
Okay.
And those four guys that we have the same, Jalen Wells, I feel like he's been the most consistent rookie all season from
Definitely.
game 1 to game whatever now, game 71. He has just been one of the best Memphis defenders on their team, but also has become just a reliable 2-guard on that, and who could slot into every lineup. So shout out to Jalen Wells. I also have Alex Sarr. Man has won multiple Rookie of the Months this year, and he's actually been really picking it up for the Wizards. And his defense, you could see why he was considered a potential number 1 pick last year. I still have Risache, again, another second half of the season guy. Kind of struggled with the shot earlier on. He's definitely picking it up. Possibly the Rookie of the Year, Stephon Castle, I have here as well. But Jay, I'm surprised that I have this guy in the first team and you don't. Yo, shout out to our guy Matas.
I know, bro. And I figured that was going to be somebody we different on. The biggest thing for me is Matas has picked up within the last month and a half particularly. The
Yeah, I would say the
other,
last 2 months, but no, I would say like especially like from February, like the
yeah.
second last day of January onwards, he has been, especially since been getting the minutes, he's been great.
So that's how it works for me. Matas Buzelis has been very special now that he's gotten a minutes uptick. The biggest thing for me is just that it's been mainly post All-Star break and kind of significantly post All-Star break. So for me, it's a much smaller sample size. You got to remember, for the first 2.5 months of the NBA season, Matas wasn't even seeing the floor, which was always kind of silly to me, given the fact
It
that
was
we
silly. It was
desperately
very,
needed the wing help, obviously.
yeah.
So it was always kind of a little odd that he wasn't getting more playing time. But more specifically, especially when you look at this group that we're talking about, Khalil Ware has played really, really well throughout the entirety of the season and has kind of like forged a real role for himself at the center position for Miami. Jalen Wells, I think him and Ron Holland are the two players out of like all the rookies that have played the most games of anybody
Yeah.
within this rookie class. Zachary Risachet, he had a slow start to the year, but has really picked things up in the second half of the year. Same thing can be said for Alex Sarr, who some people was looking at Alex Sarr real crazy
I know
after the first
they
2
were
months.
overreacting early on, bro. Like, give this guy,
Yeah.
they're freaking rookies. Give this guy some time.
Yeah, gotta give some grace, especially at the big man position on a team that's rebuilding. And Alex Sarr was never going to be a guy that you were projecting to play through at any moment anyway, right?
Yeah.
Alex Sarr always was considered as when you look at Alex Sarr as a top 3 pick in this NBA draft class, it was based off of his athletic upside defensively with the ability to stretch the floor as a 3-point shooter later on. Essentially, I hate giving Kendrick Perkins like credit for stuff, but he did his comp for Alex Sarr was Serge Ibaka, but more like later time Serge Ibaka when he started stretching to the 3-point line. And I think that's a very interesting comp because I do think that the athletic tools of Alex Sarr say that like he could be like a high level block machine the way Serge Ibaka was for
Yes.
Oklahoma City, but the 3 ball has to be consistent, and he's slowly but surely improved in that area. Still needs some work. Still needs some work if he's gonna let
Yeah.
that be something that he shoots, anywhere between 4 to 6 times a game. But Alex Sarr has really picked things up. Matas is in a very special position because he's been so special, but it's been so little time to work with. His sample size is not as significant as these other guys that I've named. That's the only. He is on my
Fair.
second team for what it's worth.
Yeah.
He's on my second team for what it's worth. But he in particular is a guy that I feel like is more. If you put him on first team, it's much more catered towards recency bias than I think it is overall body of work.
I guess. I mean, 2 months is a pretty damn big sample size at the end of the day. Like, too. Like, it's a pretty big one, especially because that kind of like signaled like. I mean, you guys have been playing good basketball too. It's not like these are like empty stats. Like the Bulls, like whether you like it or not, Jay, they're winning some basketball games.
Maybe that might be part of the hate, bro. I ain't gonna lie. Maybe it's just that maybe it's just I'm sick that Matas is hooping at the wrong time. Maybe that's what it is. It might just be that simple.
Hey, look, bro. I'd be like, again, he was my favorite rookie coming out of this, like one of my favorite prospects. So seeing him like show out, especially even though it's the end of the season, love to see it. Kel'el Ware, like again, I'm gonna say it right now, he's on my second team as well.
Okay.
But like, I feel like his like production. I mean, he was getting DNPs as well at the early on in the season, and I think that's more to do with like the Heat culture aspect, where it's like, oh, we're not trusting this rookie, we're not gonna do that, and it took Eric Spoelstra until the Jimmy Butler drama really like solidified itself, where they're like, you know what, we do need some. We'll throw in Kel'el Ware in there, and he's actually been a revelation, like to the point where I feel confident next season that they should start Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo together. I feel like Bam Adebayo as like a forward next to Kel'el Ware could be a long-term play for this team. So like I really like what he's been showing, but honestly, like his true like play hasn't really been noticed until like January. And that's when like the whole Jimmy Butler saga really started. So like him compared to maybe like Matas Buzelis, it's only a couple weeks apart. So I don't think it's gonna be like that. And I think that Matas has had a bigger impact, especially again, like I think we talked about this before, but like Matas is covering a position of need for the Bulls, and he's actually producing right now too.
Yeah.
So like he's definitely getting more of the opportunities, but I do think that that does edge him over because I feel like he's having a bit more impact, especially with winning basketball with Matas. So I'll give him the points over that. But those are our two first teams. Jay, you said Matas is already on your second team. Who else is on your second team?
So my second team is a little bit more straightforward. Like you said, Matas is already locked in, and you made a very good case, and I wouldn't even be mad at moving Matas to my first team. I
Yeah,
think the way he ends the year out will give me a lot more clarity.
yeah,
Just because, like you said, it is kind of parsing,
yeah,
because both of them do have a sample size question mark, especially
yeah.
in terms of their relevance. Because, for example, Khalil Ware has been killing the last like 2 weeks, been a double machine over the last like 2 to 3 weeks too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you could say that like he's really picked up steam in the month of March, very similar to Montas as well. So it's kind of like pulling at strings. It's kind
Mhm.
of like more so which one are you more like favorite towards? And you would think as a Bulls fan, I'd be leaning more towards Montas. So there's that. But in terms of my second team, Montas obviously is on that list. So Montas Buzelis is one. Zach Edey is on that list for me.
Okay.
Bub Carrington is on that list for me. Donovan Clingan is on that list for me still. Um, Oh man. I'm not gonna lie. I like Ease Missy still for
Yeah.
New Orleans. I feel like I have one more spot left. Am I right?
Yeah, I think you do. So you have Edie, Carrington, Matas, and
Matas.
then yeah.
And
So you have
then
like you got
Missy, Edie, Bub Carrington, Donovan Glinken.
the
And then
what's
low
that?
key, low key Kyle Filipowski might be that fifth one.
Interesting.
So what's
Okay,
that? What's that?
so who's
Mata?
so say your five again. So you have
Let me double
Matas there.
check.
You have Matas.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So it's Matas. I have Matas. I have Ease Missy. I have Zach Edey. I have Bub Carrington, and I have Donovan Clingan with Kyle
Okay.
Filipowski on the bubble.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I do like those a very like center heavy like
Yeah.
five there.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is what I like about the new freaking like all rookie teams, man, and like the all defensive, all that. Actually giving it to players that deserve it rather than like having to like funnel yourself to like these. I mean, like these teams are not gonna actually play against each other, so it doesn't really matter. So like all those guys definitely were in my running. And we do have a couple of like similarities. Like I mentioned, Khalil Ware is in mine.
Yeah.
We got Bub Carrington as well. Shout out to your boy. He was like one of your guys from like when we were talking
Yeah.
about the draft stuff. You
Yeah.
did love Bub Carrington. Gotta go Canadian. Gotta go Zach Edey. He's been like solid all year round.
Yeah.
I also have Yves Missy. Like I mean, like shout out to like the Pelicans have been ass basically this entire year. But who's been like one of their biggest bright spots, making Yves Missy at the center position? Like they've been needing to fill that position. And honestly, this if you've been watching the Pelicans recently, Yves Missy, Kelly Olynyk, that combo hasn't been too bad. I'm
Right.
just saying it hasn't been a bad combo. But you had Donovan Clingan there. He was in my running. Shout out to Kyle Filipowski. Shout out to Tristan Da Silva. He was like super good in the early parts of the year, but he's like really slowed it down, which sucks because I actually really liked how he played earlier on. But I'm gonna go with the guy who had like probably like the one of the biggest hot streaks at the beginning of the year. Kind of slowed down, but I still think he's been like solid for this team. Give me Dalton Connect. I think I'll put him in like in my
You
final
almost
position.
forget about you almost forget about him because the start of the year was so significant. Dalton to me, I don't know. Dalton to me has kind of fell out of favor with the Lakers too. That's another thing
Yeah,
that's really kind of hurt his situation. But each of
yeah,
the guys in the second team, they have their own deficiencies, right? Like for example, like Bub has been really good as an offensive initiator throughout the year, but his three ball is struggling.
he
Especially
can't he can't shoot. No, I've seen like
yeah.
I've seen some Wizards games, especially because they've for some reason faced the Raptors like 3 times since the All Star
Yeah.
break.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
I've seen a lot of Bub Carrington, but like
Yeah.
no, like, he can't shoot yet. And like again, rookie season, you give him some grace, but yeah, he
Right.
doesn't have that shot yet at all.
Yeah, like for him, the three ball is not falling. For Donovan Clingan, you can make an argument about playing time being a real issue for him, and when he has been on the floor, obviously the offensive like skill set is not showing just yet. Zach Edey is kind of like one of those like quiet double types, so he's one of those that's like not really popping off the page from Memphis. Ease Missy, it's less of like not, it's less of Ease Missy not being solid and more of like how many Pelicans games are you turning on in 2025? You
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's one of
yeah,
those. The dude's averaging like 9 and 9. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like somewhere around there. Like he's been solid. It's just how many games are you watching of the Pelicans right now? And then I think like when you look at somebody like Kyle, even Kyle Filipowski, it's very different. Like it's just like for Kyle again. Well, one, it's how many Utah games are you turning on right now? Obviously, being
Also,
a
like
Boston
they're
sports fan.
freaking like sitting Walker Kessler like a weird amount of games. So Kyle
Yeah.
Filipowski is getting like a lot more floor time for sure.
Yeah, you almost look at Kyle as like he's kind of like you don't want to say like he's benefiting from opportunity, like just like being like from the fact that Utah has clearly got a mission in mind, but at the
You're
because
telling me.
he is playing really well. He is
He is,
playing
yeah,
really
he is for
well.
sure.
But again, it is one of those things that within the confines of Utah, you also have to ask yourself like, there's a lot of empty calories going on here with
Yeah.
Utah with the way things are. The one player that we left off that maybe should get a little bit more shine is a guy who actually did, you know, play relatively well, especially over the last like month and a half, is Isaiah Collier for Utah.
He was on my short list. He was on my short list, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
he's another one who obviously has really picked things up offensively for them. Not necessarily sure what his overall like long term like fit for Utah is. That'll be a really good question.
Yeah.
But he's a player that has like kind of picked up steam defensively as well, which is a really good thing for him because he feels like he can fit into not obviously this great of a player, but I think he can fit into like a Kyle Lowry-esque archetype in terms of play style at
Yeah.
some point. I don't necessarily think Isaiah will ever be that good, but I think with that burly body set, I don't think he's as good of a scorer as like an Eric Gordon with that build, right?
Yeah.
But I do think he's a good defender on a level for his size that could kind of be somewhere between like an Eric Gordon and a Kyle Lowry, somewhere in between. And
Uh-huh.
I think that if he can grow into that kind of player, Utah got themselves an insane steal in the late 20s as a guy who's projected like top 10 before the year started coming
Yeah.
into that draft
No, for sure.
class.
No, like again, like someone who's like been getting a lot of like opportunity too because of the Colin Sexton injury from like earlier on in the season.
True, yeah.
Yeah. So like, but he's like him and Filipowski. They've been here, and as much as the Jazz are tanking, they're playing hard every single night. So shout out to those two. Also like just to go back to Dalton Connect a little bit. If it was the end of February, I would maybe be on your bandwagon. But honestly, in March, I had to put up these stats because I thought he was actually doing really well. 13 points per game, shooting 44% from the 3-point line, and he's hit 35 threes. So I think like even though like around the trade deadline, of course he got traded. He was like falling out of favor in the Lakers rotation. Like this month, he's been really getting his stride back. So I want to like shout out to Don Connect there. He's on my team. Other guy I want to shout out who didn't make my list. Again, we talked about Yves Missy, solid, Bub Carrington, Khalil Ware, all those guys. Shout again. I don't know if you want to call Raptors bias or not, but Jamal Shed has been a damn good pickup for the Raptors.
Don't sleep. And he's
Don't
been one of those guys that if you're gonna do what you're doing and give him the minutes as a way to go towards the tank, also give him credit for the fact that even as part of the tank commander, he's at least trying to play winning basketball. The guy just makes good plays.
No, he does the right thing every single time. That's the thing.
Yes.
And then this is of course someone who's been in college for 4 years. He's been in like the ultimate professional, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'll say he gives like Fred VanVleet. I know just like compared to a former Raptor, but like cover 94 feet, someone who knows how to run an offense. Like this is a guy who's going to be in the league for a long time. That's all I'm going to say for someone like Jamal Shed. The Raptors have done a pretty good job of picking up rookies. Shout out to Jamison Battle. Shout out to Jonathan Mobo. They have their positives as well. But Jamal Shed, man, he's like, we picked him up to like potentially be our backup point guard for the future, and he is going to be that guy for a long time. So he deserves, especially like I don't think he's gonna make all rookie second team, but he deserves a little bit of love, like when potentially like finding some guys to fill those spots. So yeah, those are our two teams. Just to recap, my second team: Khalil Ware, Dalton Connect, Bub Carrington, Yves Missy, Zach Edey. Jay, what was your all rookie second team?
Yeah, my all rookie second team was Zach Edey, Yves Missy, Montez Buzelis, Bub Carrington, and Donovan Clingan.
Yeah, I know. Also shout out to Donovan Clingan. We didn't get to like really talk about him much here. Bro, we talked about him last week. Like, he's probably the best center on the roster already.
Right. The reason why we didn't talk about Donovan Clingan as much is because A, we talked about him last week. B, it's one of those things where I think for him, he actually has I think of everybody we discussed, this might be a hot take, not sure.
Yeah.
Out of everybody we discussed on all rookie second team, mainly because I think we agree that there is a little bit more flexibility with Matas maybe being all rookie first team. Of all the guys that we have on all rookie second team, Donovan Clingan has the most upside in my mind to maybe be the most effective player as a sophomore as compared to his quote unquote freshman campaign as an NBA rookie. I
Yeah.
think that's Donovan Clingan. I think next year, I think they're going to embrace him as a starting center next year. And I think that Donovan Clingan, out of everybody we name, Yves Missy, Khalil Ware, Kyle Filipowski, Isaiah Collier, like those guys, I think that Donovan Clingan, sophomore year, he has the ability where I think he might end up being the most effective second-year player from this class of anybody that we put on the second team.
Yeah, no, shout out to him. I didn't have him on my team. I just feel like there's like, I mean, he has been getting to the opportunity, but it's like one of those things where it's like, man, he's like, you could definitely see the deficiencies, especially like when he goes up against smaller lineups. Like that's definitely something to like worry about in terms of someone like Donovan Clingan. But this guy's a freaking rim protector. You need those guys on your team. It was literally between him and Yves Missy for like one of my final spots there. But shout out to him. He definitely deserves some love. If he's on the team, I'm not mad whatsoever.
Yeah.
But yeah, let us know what you guys think down below. All rookies, first teams, and second teams. Do you have anyone that we didn't even mention? That's someone that we did. There's a lot of like, not really superstars in this class, but man, there's gonna be a lot of guys that are gonna be like 10-year pros. I will say that. It's gonna be a
100%
lot.
agree. Okay, as a mini rant, just because of course
Yeah.
we're probably not going to end up talking about rookies anymore after this week. For anybody that looked at the 2025 NBA draft class, right, the upcoming class in particular, I think a lot of people look at that upcoming class, especially now, with a lot less rose-colored glasses than maybe they did at the beginning of the season. Rewind to the 2024 draft class, one that a lot of people looked at very negatively in the beginning, and slowly people are starting to come around. Something that I want people to start to really understand when it comes to these NBA draft classes is that your perception of an overall depth talent is never going to be satisfied, understood, or confirmed in the first year, 2, or 3. You will
Yes.
never have a full understanding of the impact of an NBA draft class until each player on that draft class has reached their first official contract extension. That is when you will get the best understanding of where a draft actually sits in the hierarchy of talent building within the league overall. Because the thing that we misinterpret is rookie seasons are always going to be difficult. There are not too many rookies that come in year one are franchise alterers. Even if they are clearly the best player on their roster, there are not too many rookies that are coming in and leading their team to the postseason year one. Sophomore year, there is either a sophomore slump or what is called a sophomore surge. Some people thrive within a role increase, others fall off. Here's a perfect example. Has anybody thought about Jaime Jaquez this year? Right?
Yeah.
Very effective player. Many people would say in a redraft, the Lakers missed out on Jaime Jaquez, and I still agree that they probably did, given the circumstance, especially given the fact that the player they did draft, they just ended up recently trading, right?
Yeah.
But Jaime Jaquez has quickly went from a player that many thought had significant upside to a player who has kind of fell out of favor in a lot of people's eyes as a role player. But I don't think he's that bad. I think he's just a guy that's having a tough sophomore season.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's not the end, guys.
It's
It's
not
the end of
the
the
end
world.
of the
It's not the
world
end
by
of the
any
world.
means.
Yeah.
And that goes to here's another perfect example. I think a lot of people were very skeptical about Asar Thompson for the Detroit Pistons after being so injury riddled his rookie season. This year he comes in is much healthier. Amen Thompson, same thing. Much healthier, arguably two of the best perimeter defenders in the league as year 2 players. Dyson Daniels is in what, his 3rd or 4th year now?
Fourth year, I think. Fourth
Fourth
year.
year, I believe.
Yeah.
For 3 years, we thought Dyson Daniels, very questionable. Couldn't see the floor for the New Orleans Pelicans much, never had a solidified role within the roster, gets moved off of, gets a significantly heightened role as a part of the Atlanta Hawks. Now people have him as an All-NBA first-team defender. Right? The only way that you can get a full gauge of these guys is by getting past the first initial wave of them developing their game. People were putting Cade Cunningham and LaMelo Ball in the same conversations in terms of high-level players with empty calorie stats for 3 to 4 seasons. Cade Cunningham finally got help around him for the first time and floor spacing. The Detroit Pistons are a playoff team. This
Yeah.
is year 4 for Cade Cunningham, by the way.
Yeah.
You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
It's people are too quick to judge. That's what we
Way
look.
too
Yeah.
quick to judge.
Way quick to, I mean, like one of the worst draft classes ever that people like to always bring up is the 2013 draft class. Take some time. We're like 10 years like past, 10, 12 years past. Then you have like looking back, Victor Oladipo, multiple time All Star, CJ
Yep.
McCollum's like consistent 20-point per game scorer over the
Yeah.
past 5 to 6 years. Freaking Giannis Antetokounmpo over there in the 15th pick. Rudy Gobert like tied for the most defensive player of years of all time was at the 27th.
Steven
Like
Adams is in that list as
Steven
well.
Adams
Yeah,
is on
like
that list too.
that's a draft class that like you look at it, and if you did a redraft and you name your top 10, if you make a starting 5 out of the top 10 from 2013, I think you still are you're pretty good.
Yeah,
You're a
honestly,
pretty
like
strong contender.
yeah, and you still have like solid players around. I mean, like Mason Plumlee has been in the league for like 10 plus years. Tim Hardaway Jr. Like, just let stuff marinate, guys. That's basically
Yes.
what we're trying to say here. Just let stuff
Yes.
marinate. These rookies, people who are coming in here, are they going to be the best? Like, are we going to find ourselves a Giannis here? I'm not sure. I mean, it took freaking 3 to 4 years to figure out who Giannis really was too.
Right.
So it's just all about giving these guys time. A lot of these guys have shown already that they are going to be effective players on even like some of these like winning teams. I mean, we talk about freaking Jalen Wells, Zach Edey, some of these other guys. Like they're actually like contributing to winning basketball. So that's already like a really good start to their careers. Give it time to marinate, and you'll see like what the fruits of the labor actually become of this 2024 draft class. Again, if we're missing any players if they're all rookie teams, again, a lot of solid players there. So let us know what you got, some players that we missed down below. Jay, let's go into the all defensive teams. And all defense is always an interesting one because you can't just stat watch with this. It's like a lot of the defense is like all like a lot of the eye test. And I think this year more than like most years, Jay, we're starting to give more love to the perimeter defenders. A lot like there's been like a lot more love there. So I think in previous years, if we did like this sort of list, it would be a lot, littered with centers. And I think there's still quite a bit of like big men and defensive anchors here as well. But man, I think we're gonna show some love to a lot of the perimeter guys as well because they have been showing out, and not only showing out, but providing like highlight defensive plays. I feel like we've seen a lot more like highlight defensive plays this year than we have from years past as well.
Yeah. So this year in particular, I think defense has been more of an upside thing because defense across the board, you're seeing a lot more guys averaging at least a block to a block and a half a game at the big man position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Steals has been a very buzzword topic defensively with the fact that Dyson Daniels has like really, really solidified himself as a perimeter defender from the perspective of playing passing lanes and stuff like that. On ball defense is one of those things that again is more of a tail of the tape. And things like defensive rating and impact on your overall team, defensive rating, defensive VORP, all those great things that people like to lean on or whatever. All this stuff is great. I think that this year in particular is a lot more a tail of the tape. That's where you like the highlight plays kind of carry. I don't think they should be your end all be all, but I do think they should tell a lot more of the story because of the fact that like the stat distribution is a lot more median than in years past, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And especially when you take Wemby out the conversation now that he can't be like eligible for this, like some of these things are just not going to pop out like it does like the others. But we see these guys in the court like each and every night. These guys are the ones like really affecting the play on that side of the ball. Jay, I'm going to throw it over to you. All defensive first team. Who do you got there?
All right, man. So my all defensive first team, I'm not sure if this is controversial or not. I think it really depends on where you stand on it. But for me, Evan Mobley is a lock. Draymond Green to me is a lock. Amen Thompson to me, I believe also, if we have to pick a perimeter player, I think he is for sure one of them for me. I'm gonna be honest here. I still have Rudy Gobert on my list. As a first team all defensive guy, I think that he, from a defensive standpoint, is still a significant anchor for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and his on-off stats in terms of their ability to hold things down for that team defensively, it's shown mainly through their struggles with Julius Randle defensively and the impact that Rudy Gobert has being behind him, being really important. And then after that, I'm gonna go with for my fifth guy. It has to be an Oklahoma City guy, in my personal opinion. I'm going to go with Lucas Dort as my guy.
Yeah.
But I was definitely parsing between him, and I just cannot get over the fact that Jalen Williams has played all 5 positions. But I'm going to go with Lucas Dort for right now.
Okay. We have a couple of similarities. There's
Okay.
one guy. I mean, shout out to Rudy Gobert. I'm gonna tell you right now, Jay. He's not on any of my teams.
I don't hate it, but I think that if you look at what the Minnesota Timberwolves have done, it's hard to just take Rudy out when they're a top when the Minnesota Timberwolves are a top level defense, and you know that they've been kind of carried by their offensive surge, especially when it comes to Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards this season. The fact that they're still a high level defense, it just has way too much to do with Rudy Gobert. It has too much to do with his ability to anchor from behind them, where they can. He is the guy that you even go back to his days with Utah. He allows gambling on the perimeter defensively because the back end allows for so much room for error. And that's just still shown where, again, for me, Rudy Gobert is less of what you see in the stats and more of when you turn on the tape. He is a turn on the tape guy for me in 2025. So that's why he still cracks my list. I don't hate it if you would rather me move him to my second team than my first, but I can't not have him on one of my teams when Minnesota has been as good as they've been, especially post All-Star break with Julius Randle being back in the rotation, especially because of the fact that defensively, Rudy makes up for so much of what Julius has not brought to the table this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think like it's definitely interesting because like I feel like there's a lot of these guys like when you like have to like choose between two like just like certain people, you're really just like pulling like you know like really like picking at like little like and nitpicking at a little thing. So
yeah,
I don't mind it at all. Like shout out to you for like I mean having Rudy Gobert there. He was definitely in my conversation for either of these teams, but I think he just falls slightly out just because like a lot of these guys again, a lot of guys have emerged themselves as like really good defenders this year, and I want to like show them some love here on this list too. But here's my first team so far.
Okay.
Got Evan Mobley. Got Draymond Green. Those are locks. Also got Lou Dort. Got Dyson Daniels on this list.
Okay.
Got Dyson Daniels. And I think a guy who's like, I feel like we have to like show this guy a bit more love. I know he's becoming more of like an offensive threat, but man, this guy's still the defensive anchor on this team. Give me Jaren Jackson Jr.
Okay, so that was the guy. That was another guy that I felt like between him and Rudy was very, very questionable.
Yeah.
The one that I want to ask you the biggest question about, to me though, personally, is Dyson Daniels. For me, Dyson Daniels is on my second team, right?
Yeah,
he's on my second team. For me, my question is, outside of stocks, do you believe, though, that Dyson Daniels is a high-level perimeter defender? Because to me, I believe that he's a very effective perimeter defender as a roamer. I do not believe he is a stopper defensively, and I feel like that's what a lot of people are characterizing him as, simply because of his high steal rate and high steal numbers. But outside of that, Dyson Daniels has not been like this on-ball perimeter threat from a stopper, the way you look at like a Tony Allen once upon a time, and guys of that, or even Lou Dort, or even Amin Thompson, who I mentioned in my first team. I don't necessarily categorize like hot take here, but I believe that both Amin Thompson and Asor Thompson have both been better perimeter defenders as lockdown guys this year than Dyson Daniels has, and I don't think I don't think either one of those guys have the steals and blocks to say that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I think if you turn the tape on, I think that the Thompson twins have both been better perimeter defenders than Dyson Daniels, despite the fact that the hype around his stat line says Dyson should be a first-team all-defense guy.
Yeah, no, the stats are there for sure, but another one thing that really stood out for me when it comes to Dyson Daniels is that he's leading the league in perimeter stops alongside Lou Dort. It's those two guys near top of the league, in terms of getting legitimate stops at the end of possessions. Okay. So it's hard to really categorize him, especially because a lot of these guys that we mentioned here, top level defenses, at the very least top 10 defenses. Dyson Daniels is part of a team where he has to make up for the fact that Trae Young is beside him, doesn't have a great center core in terms of defending. I mean, Onyeka Okongwu is more of an offensive guy anyway, missing a lot of the true defenders they have on that team. But I feel like he's more of a standout, and when you watch the Atlanta Hawks basketball, he's the guy who's really hustling on that end. Yes, he's more of a ball hawk per se, more than and like a perimeter defender, but that's still something where it's like, oh, Dyson Daniels on that side of the court, we're gonna force ourselves to play on like a certain side of the court. So if like Dyson Daniels is on the right side, we are operating to the left side because we don't want to be like near his ability to ball hawk on the basketball court.
Yeah.
So yeah, the steals are definitely like a big standout, but also in terms of him just like gaining stops at the end of possessions, there's been like several highlights of him, especially at the end of games where he's just like able to like get like the stop needed. And I completely agree if you have someone like an Amen or an Asar over him, shout out to them. But also like I feel like out of anything this year, he deserves to be like in that upper echelon, at least for this season, all defensive teams. Like in terms of the
I
all
think the
defensive.
other reason why he gets knocked, and it's not necessarily his fault, but it does also it's his contributions to team defense from the perspective of like ranking wise, like him as an individual compared to some of these other guys we're having a conversation about, he hasn't been able to uplift this Atlanta Hawks defense to being top 15. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like he is not the tide that raises all ships.
It's tough.
It is very, very tough for his roster, and that's where I give him a lot of grace, which is why I still believe he's at least second team. But he is not the tide that raises all ships the way a Draymond Green is, the way that Rudy Gobert is, the way that I would say Amen Thompson's effort paired with Tari Eason, for example.
I was going to say Tari Eason too. It helps when you have like Tari Eason, who's been freaking damn good there as well.
Exactly right. Like though, like you put Amen Thompson and Tari Eason together, like they are impactful. Where you put those two next to Dylan Brooks, for example, and now you have yourself the core of like a defensive identity, right? Like there is a difference between those guys. See, that's the reason why, for example, I think a guy who would have been very interesting to put into my first team that you did include over maybe a Lou Dort, for example, who's a part of a very strong team defense. You know, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, very high perimeter player.
Chet Holmgren,
Jalen Williams, right? Isaiah Hardenstein. Like they have like
Alex Caruso. Yeah.
Think about their team from a contest rate. Like everybody on their team from a contest rate, everybody like on the perimeter, high contest rate for their positions, right? So Oklahoma City, it's very much defense by committee, but they do have guys that you would consider as lockdown defenders. That's where Jaren Jackson Jr. was so interesting to me because he falls into that tide that raises all ships kind of category for me with Memphis, where if you told me you put Jaren Jackson Jr. over an Amen, or you put him over a Lou Dort, I wouldn't be mad at it because I understand the perspective of it. Dyson, because he plays a very scarce position in terms of being able to raise the bar, and with Atlanta being as terrible as they are defensively around him.
They're not terrible. They're like 17th, but yeah, they're not top.
They're not terrible, but I'm saying, that's where you turn the tape on, right? Yeah. When you turn the tape on, it's not great work outside of Dyson and Jalen Johnson when he was healthy.
Yeah.
And then when they also had
Capella.
No, not when Capella was healthy. I'm thinking of he traded to Cleveland prior.
Oh, what's it called? DeAndre Hunter. Yeah.
DeAndre Hunter coming off the bench was also contributing on that side of the ball as well, right?
Yeah.
So they were much better before like the I don't even know if you call it tanking because they ain't got a pick, so I don't know what the heck is going on.
Yeah,
but like, you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
So
I know what you mean.
Overall, Dyson Daniels, to me, is an All-NBA defender. I do believe that he's an All-NBA defender this year. Parsing whether or not he's first team or second team is completely, I think, up to the comment section. I'm open to hearing what people think about that. You guys let us know. Is Dyson Daniels a first team All-NBA defender or second team All-NBA defender? I do think there is a difference between being a top 5 guy and falling within that top 10. To me, to be considered as top 5, I think you either have to be a guy that raises your defensive IQ to a point where you're a tide that raises all ships. You're a guy that individually takes your team from being middle of the pack to being a high level defense, or you are a perimeter stop guy who you can place on some of the best players in the NBA and you can trust them to be on an island, Darrelle Revis style for my NFL guys. I don't think Dyson Daniels is that caliber of player in either category, so that's why I slot him at second team. You guys let me know if he's more first team, and maybe it's something I'm missing though.
Yeah, okay, 100%. All right, let's move on to our second team, though, Jay.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys that you mentioned, though, like, do end up on my second team. But I'm going to throw it over to you first. Who do you have on your second team, all defense?
So some guys we already mentioned, right? So Dyson Daniels, obviously, at the top of that list.
Yeah.
Jaren Jackson Jr., a guy that you made an
Yeah.
argument for in the first team. I have him as my second because I couldn't let him fall off of this list at all. Jalen Williams, another guy where I mentioned in terms of
Yeah.
the Oklahoma City Thunder guys. I definitely the dude's played 1 through 5. I can't sleep on that. He's 6'9" and
Yeah.
has played every position for this team. That's
Yeah.
versatility at its finest. That's
Yeah.
my other guy. And then the other two, one of them had all defensive hype for most of the year. It's just that the Trailblazers are just so bad that we haven't paid attention to them in a
Thank
month.
you.
Tamani
Thank
Kamara
you.
is just too damn
Thank
good.
you.
I just don't want to
He's
hear
on
it.
my list too. I'm
if-
glad you're giving him love too. Yeah.
Here's how I'm going to put it.
Yeah,
And people might
thank
not want to
you.
hear this. People might even want to even acknowledge this. But I'm going to say it and I'm going to keep it at what it is. If Dyson Daniels is an all-NBA defender to me, to y'all, Tamani Kamara is an all-NBA defender.
He's on my list too. He's on my list.
Let me repeat that for people who don't hear me
I'm
straight.
glad.
If Dyson Daniels is an all-NBA caliber defender to y'all this year, Tamani Kamara is an all-NBA caliber defender this season in the NBA. I don't like period point blank. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like that's what it
good.
is. And
I'm
then my
happy with
fifth
that.
guy is Ivica Zubac for the LA Clippers.
Okay, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm glad you gave love to those two. Those two are still on my list. Freaking the number 2 defense in the league, the LA Clippers.
Yes.
And it's freaking Ivica Zubac.
Come on.
Being the anchor of
Talk
that
to
defense.
me.
Man, like if you think about it, freaking shout out to Chris Dunn, by the way, who definitely had some consideration on this list.
Yes.
I just wish he played more minutes. I just wish he played more minutes to really showcase that. But
Right.
bro, Ivica Zubac a couple years ago was like, this is like what? Like the Brook Lopez type arc where he's like, oh, this guy is more of a liability on defensive end. Bro, this guy is like up there with like Miles Turner, Jaren Jackson Jr., Evan Mobley, with like contesting at the rim, defensive rating. Like, yo, Ivica Zubac is him this year on the defensive end.
Yes, sir.
He's that guy.
Yes, sir.
And the thing is, like, we talk about like his like constant double machine. He's like a 16-10 player this year. He's been like, in my opinion, like their second most reliable Clipper this year because like Kawhi Leonard in and out with injury,
right?
James Harden being the number 1 guy. But man, Ivica Zubac has had a career year, and I'm glad we're giving him some love on this all defensive team. I also have Tamani Kamara. Bro, he's my favorite defender to watch in the league. Him and Amen Thompson, yo, those 2 guys are my favorite 2 defenders in this league.
Crash outs, just crash outs.
Yo, like he does like he has like Scottie Pippen length and like the way that he's able to block shots, get in passing lanes. This guy like is like one of the best in the league in my opinion. Like stripping, like when they're about to go up for like a shot in the paint, like stripping like and getting those type of steals. He's great at those. 1 defensive player of the month in February as well. Yo, Tamani Kamara, shout out to him. He also made this. The other 3 guys though, Jay, Amen Thompson. Of course, I had to have him on this list.
Right.
I have J-Dub. Obviously, bro had to play everything this year, and he's like a huge part of like why the Thunder are number 1 defense in the league this year.
Right.
And bro, shout out to Derek White. I feel like Derek White deserves some love here. I'm gonna put him there in my final 5 spot.
He might be the most questionable one to me, but I'm not against it. Obviously, with the Boston Celtics being what they are this year, especially on the defensive end, and I would say that perimeter-wise, he has picked up for a lot of slack, given the fact that Drew Holiday has kind of teetered off a lot this year.
He's
mainly
been
on the
injured.
offensive
He's been like
end.
really injured this year. Like
he's teetered off more offensively than defensively, but Derek White is picking up in that department significantly. I think the biggest thing about this second team to me is just versatility across the board. As I mentioned beforehand, Tamani Kamara's ability to guard 1 through 3, play up a little bit towards the 4 defensively has been huge. We said Jalen Williams a few different times in terms of what he's been able to provide for this team, especially with the fact that they've had such a rough time, especially in the beginning of the season, from a center depth position, which is hilarious because they're the only team I think has 3 centers on the roster that you like really trust to play 15 plus minutes a game, but they just were having a real rough time keeping those guys on the floor. Dyson Daniels, obviously from a perimeter standpoint, I think that he's a guy, again, if we're talking about playing like that free safety role defensively, he's a guy that I trust in the middle of my 5 to be able to really kind of like anchor passing lanes and being able to really, be real communicative and different things like that. Ivica Zubac, again, falls into that category. I just mentioned it in terms of my first team all defense guys. If you're a tide who raises all ships, I think you have to be in consideration for that. And I think when you look at a backcourt that's led by James Harden and Norman Powell, having that guy on the back end and Ivica Zubac being one of the top guys in contest rate, I think kind of comes with their kind of Olay defense aspect, right?
Yeah.
But I think you also assimilate it to being very similar to the way that the Timberwolves are able to get away with things with Rudy Gobert behind them. Or for another example, I think another guy who falls into this category is kind of how reliant that Memphis is with Jaren Jackson Jr. from a contest rate standpoint as well, right? Like these are guys that I think when you look at what they're able to be trusted with, Ivica Zubac is at the top of that list of dudes where you say like, okay, if they come, like let them in. Because the result might be worse if you're meeting Ivica Zubac at the rim than
It
anything you can
really
do out
is.
here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And who thought
Yeah.
this was gonna happen, bro? Who thought that out of all people, like, to really like raise their game? I mean, we were shocked when like Brook Lopez like did it like a couple years ago when he joined the Milwaukee Bucks because we know him as like the low post guy, the like leading scorer in Brooklyn Nets history. He had that sort of feel. Bro came in like to Milwaukee, became a 3-point shooting god and a
Right.
fucking defensive anchor. Yo, Vika Zubac, man, career year, leading the number 2 defense in the league is kind of crazy as
Yeah.
well. So like, shout out to him. I just want to give some bit more love to Derek White, man. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen this guy play like in the Celtics uniform these last 2 years. This guy's just a freaking like this guy just disrupts everything. Like especially like when you have such an offensive onus on Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and all that. Drew Holiday like missing a lot of time, so he had to play a lot of this time next to Peyton Pritchard. This guy
Yeah.
is still like one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, and you see that on a night-to-night basis. He gets the best guard, and he always puts in like that, like 100% effort. And the Celtics are still a freaking top 5 defense, and that is with a rotating center core. I mean, like Kristaps Porzingis has missed a lot of games. Al Horford has missed a lot of games. They've had to play like many minutes of Neemias Queta and Luke Cornett. And I feel like the most like consistent guy on that team, and a big reason why they're able to like place like this sort of like this sort of way is that Derek White is like on that perimeter. They freaking like have like defenders at every position, and he's weirdly enough on like from a guard position, he is their anchor in my opinion. Like he is the guy like really like leading the charge now, especially because Drew Holiday has missed quite a bit of games.
Yeah, Derek White still obviously a special defender. I think he's in that position right now where he's kind of lost in the shuffle by the fact that the Celtics have just been so good. I think it's
Yeah,
very different from like highlighted the Oklahoma City Thunder, for example, too, where it's like their culture is built around Shea get buckets, everybody else guard their ass off, right?
yeah,
So
but they
like
can
you're
all score
going to
too. They can all score. They
of
mature.
course,
They
of
can do.
course,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
they
yeah.
have
Exactly.
real depth at that space
Yeah,
as well, right? But I think that it's one of those things that just because of the way they're built, they're able to put so much pressure perimeterly on. Because you look at it like one guy we didn't name, and it's more so because of his minutes and because of the fact that he's dealt with injury. Alex Caruso, another guy who could
he
have
is
been on
another
this
guy. Yeah,
list,
was on
right?
my
Chris
list.
Dunn, another guy, just doesn't play enough, but obviously fits this archetype, right? So it's one of those things where and obviously he's a Clipper, but I'm saying the archetype itself, right, of just being a lockdown perimeter defender. These guys, they fit the mold. It's just about getting playing time. It's just about fitting beyond that, those different things. So Derek White just falls into that category too, where we're kind of so used to him being considered as a high level defender that you almost kind of underrate his defense.
Yeah, no,
And
he's kind of expected. You're like, this is what he does. This is just what he
right,
does on the
exactly.
defense.
He
Yeah,
kind of fits into that category where it's like when you have those nights where him and Peyton Pritchard are going for 30 plus, you're like, oh yeah, he does get buckets. Like
yeah,
that's the part where you're more surprised. Like you understood that he's a high level defender because he's always kind of had that level of archetype going back to his San Antonio Spurs days.
yes,
It's
yeah,
the offensive arsenal, especially him improving his 3 ball over the last 2 to 3 years. That's been like okay, this is what has unlocked his game. But the defense has always been the calling card.
yeah,
So you kind of underrated at a point where you don't even consider him as an All NBA caliber defender because you're like, oh, like he guards, like that's his thing, like that's his way to keep himself on the floor. When in
yeah.
reality, like he's actually much more of a glue guy that people give consideration. It's just not crash out demon like Tamani,
Oh, like, oh
Amin,
man, yeah, like
Asar. Yeah, like it's just
there's
not
not that aggressiveness, but he's like in
right,
the right position all the time. This
right.
guy like did like perfect positioning. This guy like just like communicates so much on the defensive end as well. Like I gotta shout out D White. He's been doing this for like especially like ever since he's joined the Celtics, and I think he's an all team defensive guy. Some other guys that you like, I'm gonna throw out some other guys here that I like had in consideration who I didn't include here. Giannis Antetokounmpo. I didn't. I told you I missed out on Rudy Gobert, but bro, I just had a freaking like for Vika Zubac this year, bro. I was like
Right.
on the freaking trade all year round. So shout out to Zubac.
Yeah.
OG Anunoby for me, like for the Knicks.
Fair.
He's
Okay.
he's definitely been in the mix. Jaden McDaniels, shout out to the Timberwolves, but Jaden
Yeah.
McDaniels is definitely in that mix. And another guy, bro. I mean, like Shea definitely has should get some love and like I mean he's not obviously like on like the level of some of these guys, but he is a
Yeah,
damn he's still like people like obviously his offensive game is a standout. He's probably gonna win MVP this year. But at the same
right.
time, right, his defense is like there's a bunch of guys on this team that is elite defenders, but he doesn't like feel like he's like an outlier there at any sort.
Yeah, yeah. So Shea is like his defense contributes to his MVP case. It doesn't
More.
necessarily make him a top 10 defender.
Yeah, no, I did for sure. I did. I wasn't
Yeah,
like
it's one
yeah.
of those. It's one of those where I think his defensive upside contributes to why he's important enough to be considered highly in the MVP conversation because his effectiveness as a connective tissue on that defense, where he's not like, I'm gonna give you 30 and then be a liability. That's the Luka Doncic argument. That's the James Harden would he won MVP argument, right?
Yeah.
He now provides a defensive element that that creates more upside for him, right? So it contributes more. Him being a high level defender, I would say Shea is a guy who you could make the argument at the point guard position is a top 10 to top 15 defender at his position, which contributes to him being considered top 5 amongst all players in the league and helps in his conversation against Nikola Jokic, who I would not consider as a top 10 to top 15 defender at his position. And remember, Nikola Jokic plays a much more defensive dependent position, being at the center spot.
For
So
sure, yeah.
that's where you start to parse things from an MVP conversation standpoint.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about who the top 10 defenders in the league are, obviously I think that's where we have to, we have to give a little bit more credence to maybe the guys around Shea more so than like him specifically.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. One more guy though, Jay, I wanna like throw at you, and then you can give me a couple guys that you like had did you kind of missed out on too.
Okay.
Jay, my my Raptors are second in defensive rating since the All-Star break, and
Okay.
you know who's freaking leading that? Scotty Barnes, bro. If you freaking watch these games, man, Scotty Barnes as the offensive game has kind of stagnated from last year. I will say that,
Uh,
but man, this guy is levels ahead as a defender this year.
I think
Watching
he's
him like be able
improved.
to switch on like to like some of the best wings in the league, being
Yeah.
able to like up his just like his counting stats as well, and just him like just like being able to just stay in front of like anyone he's able to defend. Granted, again, it's a least tougher schedule, but the system that Darko's putting out there is definitely working. And at the point of attack, it is Scotty Barnes, and he is the. I think in future years, like in like years to come, if the Raptors do become more competitive and like this defensive system like actually like translate to like years where they're actually competing, then Scotty Barnes would probably be more in these conversations. But I want to just shout at him because he, if anything, this year, the offensive game maybe has kind of like has stagnated, but the defense he is becoming one of the better especially like wing defenders in the league.
Just to kind of touch on Scotty real quickly, like I'm just glad they trust him that much. I think
Yeah,
that's the biggest thing too, right? Because creating a defensive identity around this idea of flying around the floor, mainly relying on 6'9" and above in order to be able to really work, but mainly within that wing archetype standpoint, like he sets the tone. He just does. Like defensively, especially because you guys don't have an elite level rim protector. Because I can't call Jacopoto that. You know what I mean? Obviously,
yeah,
right? Pirtle is not that guy in terms of being like a defensive hub the way some of these other guys we've had a conversation about.
yeah.
Um, are reliable, right? So the play style and the high energy, like effort like approach that Scotty plays with, that's going to be the approach that carries this style if that's the way that you guys are trying to go. I'm glad that they trust him enough to be able to do that. My biggest question, obviously, when it comes to Scotty, though, obviously, is going to be how long term can this work in terms of him being one of the dudes that guards the best perimeter player defensively? Because I do think he is capable, but I also think as much as they've trusted him defensively, it feels like they don't have the equal amount of trust in him offensively.
And this is why we brought in Brandon Ingram, which is like to help with that, like, and especially like at the start of next season. And I think that the team like understands like look, Scotty like his main skill is passing the ball, especially in the offensive end. His defense is like what's becoming more of his calling card, especially like after what he's shown this year. Put like we've seen like the growth of RJ Barrett, Emmanuel quickly, and then adding Brandon Ingram to this lineup, they're gonna more than enough like make up for the scoring that Scotty's gonna kind of like regress a bit. And I think like in the next couple of years you're gonna see like more like defensive love for Scotty, I will say, in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jay, is there anyone else like you want to do a quick shout out of?
Um, some
Anybody?
of them are kind of jokey, but it's like I just genuinely believe it. I still think Victor Wembanyama, like, man, like,
Shout out to him, bro.
damn the torpedoes on how many games played, bro. Like,
Hey,
when you're
look,
in the DPOY conversation, like, this is just
I will say
ridiculous.
if we're going with that route, shout out to Jared McCain, man. This is your rookie of the year. You should have
Nah,
won.
real rap. Like, it's just one of those things where, like,
Yeah.
Victor Wembanyama is like leading. He led DPOY before
He was
going
going to be
down.
unanimous.
Like,
I think he
was
was going to be unanimous.
I think it was going to be blatant. It was super blatant, right? He's in
Yeah.
there. I think if Asor Thompson played more games with Detroit, I think he's another guy who should have been in the
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah.
Obviously, we said him in passing as well, but I think Chris Dunn deserved to be in this conversation as well.
Tari Eason, if he made it to 65 games, was in this conversation.
I think Tari, like, you know, they do co-rookie of the year, different stuff like that. You almost have to, like, the crash out bros and him and Amin, like, you almost have to kind of give them like an equal spot in a way, because it's just like game records together.
Yeah.
Like, what they do separately is a whole different thing, and I think Amin that does have more upside as an on-ball defender than Tari does, but those two guys together as game records is like absolutely ridiculous.
Yes.
So I think Tari does get conversation if he, plays more minutes, plays more games, like that kind of thing as well. So those are probably the guys. I think we listed a lot of the guys who are like in real conversation for it, but I think the guys that we named as the main 10 are the main 10 though, for sure.
Yeah, we have like maybe like one or two guys like basically from it, but at the same time, like I think both of us put good enough arguments for them to like, even like having put them in the conversation. Let us know down below if there's anyone else we're missing for these all defensive teams. Do you agree, disagree? Let us know down below. Jay, moving on to the next topic is this is part of like what we do every single week now, and it is the at the buzzer topic where we want to like talk about something at the end here. And Jay, I have a problem here that I have to discuss because LeBron James went on the Pat how come I can't say his name? What the hell?
Pat
Pat McAfee, right? Pat McAfee show earlier this week, and bro, this this feels like the first time where, at least in a while, where LeBron has called out a bunch of people. Like there's like I wouldn't say it's a crash, but it's like this feels like one of those interviews where it's like, man, I'm near the end of my career, I'm taking no prisoners. Type of like interview he had with the Pat McAfee show. This man called out Stephen A. Smith. This man called out Brian Windhorst. This guy was out for everyone, especially the Stephen A. stuff where he was like, comment on my game, comment on the game that's on the court. When it gets personal, that's when I have to step in. That's why he was there defending Bronny, defending his teammates, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. Jay, my issue with this was the response from Stephen A. Smith, especially. Because after this interview aired, you already know that Stephen A. Smith was going to have a response. It's freaking Stephen A. Smith. He was always going to have something. This man called out LeBron for, one, not attending Kobe's funeral, his memorial service, which has been easily debunked by the fact where people have seen him in the crowd. There's been like pictures of it. And he also like asked not to be like put on camera because he was like he didn't want it to take away from like what was going on with Kobe and like making sure that he was honored the right way. And then he also called out LeBron for not being there for Dwayne Wade's Hall of Fame announcements ceremony. When in that same week, that was the week where Bronny suffered a cardiac arrest, so LeBron was kind of like with him for a lot of the time. And Stephen A. Smith decided to call that out. He did apologize for the Kobe thing because he got that information wrong. But Jay, you got him doing that. You have Kendrick Perkins defending Stephen A. Smith at every quarter, saying that he has blocked LeBron James and that he could no longer contact him. Congratulations, Perk. You feel like you're the big man there. But this whole situation feels very high school drama. LeBron tried to kind of like nip it in the bud, and it feels like Stephen A. Smith and Perkins. I mean, we talk about it's ESPN like trying to like hook themselves onto the drama of the NBA, and I feel like this is a very like distasteful, this whole situation.
I think the biggest thing when it comes to the LeBron coverage, particularly with this saga that we've had with him versus media, I think is another extension of the new media uprise that we've seen over the last year and a half to 2 years. And what I mean by that is the concept around player narrative has become so much more important, right? Mainly because of the fact that, I hate to say it, but I think the transition for places specifically like a Fox and like an ESPN especially has moved more towards narrative and less of reporting. And these sites obviously are initially built off reporting, being breaking news, providing information based off of reliable sources, being able to have real conversation with these players in a way that gets them information that brings a highlight and insight to the side of the game that we don't get to see on a night to night basis in terms of what's on the floor, right?
Uh-huh.
And this saga in particular has raised to me the idea that media is making a transition where players are almost having to create themselves as the source because the source's report is starting to become much more skewed.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's becoming
Yeah.
a point where people are saying, people tell me, and you have to start really now asking people, who is people? Right now, you start looking at a Stephen A. Smith, you start looking at those guys, and you say, people are telling me, and you look at a Stephen A. Smith, and you say, who are those people? Because, for example, he had a spat with Jaylen Brown once upon a time, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the same issue, I think not same issue literally, but I think it was in relation to his circumstances with Nike and different things around that line, and of course
Yes.
his
Yeah, I
fit with
remember
the
that.
Boston
Yeah.
Celtics, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And then they have the sit down. Him and Jaylen Brown actually sit together, and a lot of things get debunked in that interview, right? And it kind of goes again to that extension of, okay, so are we trying to create a narrative here, or are we trying to give true insight that contributes to the fan experience of learning and seeing more of the game of basketball beyond the 48 minutes on the floor, right? And so the thing that I think is hurting our game significantly is three things in particular. One we actually touched on once upon a time, which was the battle between old and new, right? The
Yes.
idea of nostalgia actually being acted as a negative thing as opposed to it being positive. We celebrate our new school much less in the NBA than any other sport across, especially
Yeah.
across nationally recognized sports,
Yeah,
right?
I will say that Pat McAfee in this like episode, because I did watch the whole interview,
Uh
he was
huh.
saying how in this like the conversations in the NBA are like a lot more like it's just like so much different and so like out there compared to like all the other sports.
Yes, it's clearly the NBA has created a diva mentality in a way that has created a like telenovela, like old school like drama show type of feel behind it where you're tuning in more so for what could happen outside of the court more so than what happens on the floor.
Yeah,
For example, I think one of the most intriguing things this year was the Luka Doncic trade, right? But the
yeah,
reason why I think the Luka Doncic trade is so important and impactful is not necessarily because they traded a 25-year-old. Not even necessarily because it was the Lakers that were the ones that acquired him. It's the fact that we learned so much about Nico Harrison
yeah,
in a 2-week time frame that no one knew about in terms of how he operates, his feeling towards his best player, his understanding of where the franchise is headed, right? The
yeah,
ideology that maybe the Dallas Mavericks might be a team on the move, given the fact that their new owners are more in the casino hedge funds type business,
yeah.
right? Different things like that. So we learned so much more about that organization through the Luka Doncic trade, more so than talking about the actual fit on the floor. Because we all understood trading Luka Doncic was absolute batshit crazy. Let's be real,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But it was the outside implications. It was them trying to justify it by knocking down Luka Doncic's character, right? His outside antics, things
Yeah.
like him being overweight, his conditioning,
Yeah.
drinking, like
Yeah,
using
but
stuff like
not
that
focusing
where
on the product on the floor, which we've seen Luka Doncic on the floor for the past 5, 6 years. He is one of the best players in the
exactly.
world.
You see what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's the ideology of using these other narratives to push headlines that are not relevant to the fact that for 48 minutes on the floor, this is a top 5 caliber talent, right?
Yes.
And so I think that permeates throughout the entire NBA. Number 2, obviously, is the tanking problem. We've talked about that many a times,
Well,
obviously, in terms of the NBA having a
before
real
we end this
trouble. And
episode,
we're,
I do have before the end of this episode, we do have to do a
yeah,
quick talk about
and,
that. Yeah.
and, and that's obviously its own separate thing, right? And I think the other thing overall is this idea of media versus players kind of taking away the fun of actually critiquing these guys for what they do and don't do. I think that's
Yeah,
the other part that created such a real disconnect. A perfect example: the Shaquille O'Neal viral video of him talking about the Detroit Pistons, right?
I hate
Him
that. I hate that.
him not only saying, him not even acknowledging the fact that they were top 6 in the Eastern Conference, but saying that Chauncey Billups was the guy that turned them around, right? Right? Not even the coach for this team, right?
Oh yeah, that
It's an
hurt. That hurt.
acknowledgement that there's a disconnect between analysis and narrative, to the point that you question whether or not our analysts are actually even watching the games now.
Bro, they're not, yo, they're personalities at this point.
Agreed.
They're not actually like analyzing the game. He openly admits in that video he doesn't watch teams that have over 40 wins. Like he only watches teams that have over 40 wins, and that those are the teams worth watching. Like what is this? Like what is this, like trying to like help like improve the game? Like come on now.
Right. So I think that's the biggest thing for me. This stuff with LeBron James is very I'm just glad he's popping his shit a little bit too. Let me just say
I'm
that, by the
glad,
way.
bro. I'm
I heard
happy.
Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade talk about this beforehand, and I do think it's very important. He's been very quiet for a long time, and I'm glad that the personality aspect of him is coming out. It was really nice to see it when he was doing the podcast with JJ Redick, of just being able to like pick his brain and see that side of basketball. But the narrative aspect of that podcast also really added to just like kind of gravitating towards LeBron in terms of like some of like the things we've been able to see him accomplish. So when I saw that he was going to be on the Pat McAfee show, I was at work actually, and I was so astounded because I was thinking, first of all, I was surprised he was in studio. That was huge
What?
to me. That
Yeah,
was huge to
honestly, yeah.
me, actually, being one of the biggest things that stood out to me. But number two was how open he was about some of the things, especially from a media standpoint, in terms of coverage. I think he's been so much more open in general about things. Like, again, another very viral moment was his thoughts on the debate around the face of the league. I think, although some people would say was a very naive approach, given the fact that he kind of pre-established his name in the hat of facing the league when he entered in
Yeah.
2003. I think the flip side of it is the media coverage around the NBA around this time versus even when LeBron was drafted is built more around the concept. Gilbert Arenas said this at that time, recently, around that time when the viral moment happened. It's not as favorable to be considered as the face of the league in 2025 as it was in years past. You're the most criticized guy in the world in terms of basketball when you're the face of the league. Once upon a time, you were the guy that was put on the pedestal where you could do no wrong, when you were considered as one of those guys that was the face of a franchise, face of a league. So I think that even the mantle of face of the league is not the same as it was when LeBron James came in the league. And I'm glad that he was transparent about that.
Yeah.
So I'm just glad he's being more verbal in general, because he's a guy that like we just haven't, for a guy that's been around for 20 years and for a guy that has accomplished so much, to still almost know so little about him and his thoughts around the game and the coverage of the game is so much of an anomaly that it makes these moments like almost more cherishable in a way.
Yeah, it's also a testament to him that like, whoa, when we talk about like some of like the top superstars in the league, you talk about like Jordan in the past, Kobe. There's always like these little like these situations, whether it was the gambling stuff, whether it was him getting like leaving the league for Michael Jordan, whether it was the stuff that happened in Denver for Kobe, like those like allegations. There's always like these like big scandals like surrounding like the top players. Can you tell me if there was some big scandal around LeBron? This guy has been like nothing more than a model citizen, besides maybe the decision. I will say that the decision was a bit of a
Of course, of course, of
was a bit of
course.
a yeah. But besides that, this guy has been a freaking model citizen, like trying to improve the game, and now defending the game to the point where he's like he feels that like he understands how his voice matters so much in order to defend like this game of basketball and like the narrative surrounding the game. You talk about how ESPN like focuses more on the narratives than the actual in-game play. That's why they freaking brought in Shams Charania. Well, that's why they wanted Woj in their studio for the longest time, because they wanted the breaking news. They wanted the outside stories. That was their focus. We talk about them freaking getting rid of Zach Lowe. that we knew like when like he got rid of him, the focus was
Yes.
there. Them always wanting to have Agent Wojnarowski in studio, having Sham Charania in the studio, having personalities and freaking Kendrick Perkins and Stephen A. Smith over some of these guys who are willing to talk the game of basketball. Like we know what direction they're in, and they want to be sure that they're the ones controlling the narrative. And I'm glad that the players, especially in the league today, are trying to take back the narrative and say, look, all the stuff that Dave said about it, that's BS. I'm trying to like do it, and then LeBron being kind of the catalyst, the guy being ahead of that, I think is absolutely fantastic.
Very important. I think to kind of end off on that, I think there's a very important statement in that of LeBron James having to step in a way as a guy who you can make an argument, obviously, is still in that top 5 conversation in terms of guys we look at as the face of the NBA until he retires,
Mm-hmm.
and changing that narrative around media coverage. Because the other part of it, TV, is the way the media covers the NBA is going to be what tears the NBA down. That's
Yeah,
the other part of it. Because yes, the productivity on the floor is its own conversation, but the coverage around the NBA contributes just as much to the actual on floor product as the on floor product itself does.
mm-hmm.
Right? So because of the analysis around the NBA is always negative, the interpretation and absorption of the experience becomes more negative. So our conversations around it have to improve where we're having. This is why I think podcasts like the ones we have are so much more important. And I pray that one day we get to a level where our voice matters more. But obviously, you have guys like the Kenneys, you have guys like P with the Plug with what they're doing on numbers on the board. You have what Lowe does in terms of when we talk about Legends of Winning. You have a lot of those different guys right across the board. And those are just guys I name as YouTubers, but
Yeah,
obviously there's guys in the real podcasting space like that are a lot more recognized in terms of national media as well,
yeah,
on ESPN platforms and things of that nature. The Tony Joneses of the world and guys in that pocket who kind of keep
yeah,
the foot on the gas of like having real conversations around basketball, because
yeah,
that's going to be the stuff that keeps the NBA alive, is the fact that we can still talk about basketball from an unbiased perspective, because all of the narrative stuff is the stuff that keeps people tuned in terms of daily show absorption. But the nuanced conversations around basketball is what allows a person to watch the game at a high level, as opposed to just sitting there for 2 hours just watching guys put a ball through the basket.
yeah. Honestly, man, I mean, this is why, like, I mean, like, shout out to Kenny. I mean, Kenny has been like, honestly, like, especially for people like in terms of content creating, has been like a huge influence for a lot of us, for
Yeah.
sure. But like him doing like the whole like enjoy basketball, like brand and everything like that, like kind of showcase like is a good way of like putting like overall just improving the conversation, because I we have to understand that media influences so much of how people view it. So if like you see like inside the NBA, ESPN talking down on the game of basketball all the time, that's going to influence the way you look at the games. Like, oh yeah, this stuff that Dave's saying, that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm going to be focusing on the basketball court. And when we need the voices, this is why I'm excited. Like we mentioned, Amazon getting their own studio. We have NBC coming back. I hope like getting like these different voices and not just seeing the same voices over and over again, just completely bashing the NBA. Being able to like give us different views and just different like opinions on different things would be like so much better for this game. So I'm excited for what's to come there. Also, one more thing, shout out to LeBron James. The freaking Mind Your Game podcast is coming back, and now with freaking Steve Nash as well. I think that's something to look out for. So I'm glad that he's bringing that back as well. But yeah, again, I mean, we've had this conversation weeks ago. The NBA media space just needs to like improve in terms of like just overall positivity and focus on the game of basketball. And this whole thing with LeBron James, Kendrick Perkins, Stephen A. Smith is just contributing more to like what we're saying that's like what's wrong with the NBA. And I'm glad that LeBron is at least like putting his foot down and kind of like defending the rest of the league in this sense, and like making sure that like the real stories are heard, which is great, just
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
But yeah, Jay, this is another great episode. This is a great way to end it. I think like these type of conversations about media, especially because this is a space that we're in and the space that we're trying to break through as well. That like these are the conversations that we want to be leading in eventually when we like go into the space. So we want to make sure that we like start off early here. Again, talking about a lot of the positive stuff, like all rookie teams and all defensive teams. These are some of the best guys, whether in terms of rookies, in terms of defense, that we want to focus on in the league, and they deserve all the love. We want to be pushing forward these narratives going forward.
Mm.
But Jay, another great episode. Thank you guys for watching. What do you have to tell these beautiful people before we sign out?
Like I said before, the podcast really kicked off, man. We're close to the postseason, and that's when we do our best work. If you guys saw last year on the short form tip, we were going crazy. Covered every game of every series, all the way up to the NBA Finals and through and through. And it was one of our best times from a social media standpoint because we were just really locked in. You want to talk about nuance? You want to talk about really locking into the games? You want to talk about cutting things down from a quarter by quarter overview standpoint? Like, we were really locked in. We're talking about 1 minute to 3 minute videos of really giving game on what we saw on the floor on a night-to-night basis. And that's the type of stuff that we think is going to be a really good contributor to this change in the narrative around basketball, which is leaning more on what we see on the floor. Obviously, we try to do that as best that we can when we're actually on the podcast, of not kind of talking about things in a macro sense and talking about things more on like a night-to-night basis. Here's what we see. Here's the amalgamation of what we know this player is good at, what we know they're bad at, what we know they contribute to their team, how they fit, what their role is. We do this on a day-to-day basis when we cover cover stuff on the podcast. But the playoffs is different, man. If you think it's different for the players, it's different as a podcaster too, man, because you see stuff from a totally different perspective when the game is high level like that. So we hope to have another really strong year of covering the postseason like we did last year. I think that the matchups this year, given health, will be almost, if not significantly better than a lot of what we even saw last season, which gives us an even raised bar in terms of what we got to come with energy-wise in terms of covering these games. So I'm super excited for that. TV, I'm still crossing my fingers to see if I can get that perfect NBA script Western Conference playoff set up, because that's obviously going to be heated itself. If you guys haven't seen that, I'll probably have a clip of that on the social medias, or click on the podcast from last week where we did our NBA script towards the back end of the episode, where we shared a couple of different scenarios that we thought would be really interesting going into the postseason. But yeah, man, I mean, it's that time. TV is that time. The bright lights are kicking on. The teams that we want to see on a night-to-night basis play at the high level, they're going to be on that stage. There's some new faces in the mix, which is always a good time. And I think on top of all of that, man, I mean, we're in a day and age now where the narrative around basketball is at stake, and conversations like these where we can have, more macro and even micro conversations around covering the game from a nuanced standpoint, that's going to be the stuff that turns the tide. All of this stuff about little lame conversations that relate to drama and all that stuff goes out the window come postseason time. It's, can you ball for 48 minutes and get your team through a 7-game series? And this is going to be a time where the people who really know ball, they're going to pay attention, they're going to learn, and they're also going to enjoy the conversations around seeing the game from a high level receptive standpoint, and not just all of this other fluff that we've been getting all year.
Yeah, man, 100%. And we're getting so much closer to that as the weeks go by. We are this episode's coming out on March 29th. We are almost in April, which means we have this episode, of course. We have the NBA Awards, which is coming up very soon. You know that during the postseason too, that Jay and I, we not just the short form content. We record sometimes even multiple episodes throughout the week.
Yeah, true.
The NBA is changing this quickly, especially in postseason time, that we're gonna have to lock in on that. We of course have the All NBA episode coming out soon as well. So just highlighting the great things about this game. That's where you're gonna find the stuff here on the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, talking about what the best of what the league has to offer, and it's gonna be coming through very, very soon. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for watching, for all the support. Continue to support the Hit Your Free Throws podcast through all the links in the description. Jay and I will be back next week with a new episode. Hope you all have a fantastic day. This is TV. This is Jay. We're signing out. Peace.